Welcome to my channel. This is another time-lapse video. This is of a self-portrait from a mirror, and I wanted to talk a little bit about how my studio is set up to try to get a sense of how the self-portrait setup works, at least how I arrived at a process that worked for me. This is obviously not to scale, and it's not a very good drawing, but I couldn't get a photograph of the studio to represent this stuff, so I did the best I could. So I have a light normally that would illuminate my palette, and another light that illuminates my easel and my subject, and I'm about 10 feet back from the easel, and I paint observationally. So I'll draw observationally from here, and use sometimes just my brush. Sometimes I use a proportional divider or calipers to get measurements down, but I do a lot of walking back and forth to make marks, coming back, checking them, and so on. When it comes to doing the eyes, I try to get up close to see the eyes because they're hard to see from this far away, and everyone keys in on the eyes. So I wanted to make sure I get the best look at the eyes I can when I'm doing this sort of normal approach to painting. This is what I set up for painting from a mirror. After much trial and error, I wound up placing myself very close to a mirror that was just slightly behind my easel at an angle. The light that's lighting the easel is also lighting the mirror, and the light that's lighting the palette is lighting me. And you see there's a red line in that diagram. I'm standing just at the point where the light on my right that's lighting the easel doesn't directly illuminate my face. If I go any more forward, it'll illuminate my face, and I didn't want that. I only wanted direct light coming from one side. There's a lot of bounce light coming off the wall, so a lot of reflected light in the shadow areas that I couldn't control without doing a lot to put negative modifiers up that I didn't have on hand. But this is something that I found was the most useful way so far for me to paint from a mirror. I did put a crosshairs on the mirror using a whiteboard marker just to kind of place my face in the right spot every time. But that was the setup, and this is the best photo I can get from my perspective. It was hard to take a photo to represent my perspective, but this is the best one I could get. So it's roughly what I was seeing when I was painting. And you see me here doing the drawing. I'm using proportional dividers to make these marks. I'm not able to stand back and evaluate if they're correct, because if I stand back, I won't be able to see myself. I'm not translating the sizes with the proportional divider. I'm really just using them like calipers. And even though they're in my hand and I'm extending them out, I'm doing that to have a consistent distance from my head. The caliper points that I'm looking at are actually the reflected ones in the mirror. So I'm measuring my reflection by my reflection, which is a little bit counterintuitive, and it was not how I had done this previously. It seemed to work out really well, though, and it didn't seem to matter how far away I was from the mirror. This method of using the reflection of the calipers to measure the reflection in the mirror seemed to work out pretty well. And I'm doing a much more detailed drawing than I normally would. I'm using charcoal. I don't normally draw with charcoal when I'm painting on a canvas, but I wanted to get a lot more detail in here so that I didn't have to worry about constantly fixing the drawing when I paint, which I'm normally happy to do. I normally make very minimal marks in my drawing, and I fix the drawing with paint as I go. Because of the difficulty in finding my place, and this is the final drawing. You see there's so much more detail. I never really draw this much detail. But because it's so hard to sort of find my face in that mirror, I felt like I needed a really strong drawing so that when I go through the painting process, I really only need to worry about finding the right colors and putting them in the right spot and not worry so much about constantly managing the drawing. I'm using a really big brush here just to put in the background. There's a sort of black cloth behind me that I'm using as a negative modifier. It also just makes it easy to have a black background. I started with a big brush. I'm using a smaller brush now as it gets closer to the head to try to maintain that silhouette, which is something I wouldn't normally be too worried about. But again, because I'm going from a mirror, having to constantly refix an outline is just a lot more work than I wanted to do. I even come back here and I fix this up with a Q-tip swab just to get the outline just a little more in line with the original drawing. Again, just so there's less work for me to do, fewer decisions to make when I start actually painting the head. I start off here by trying to get some anchor points painted in, things that I feel like I have strong confidence in the drawing. The eyes I don't have a ton of confidence in, because when I normally have a live subject, in order to paint eyes, if I'm standing 10 feet back, I can't see a lot of detail. So I'll go up closer just to get that detail of the eyes. I can't do that with the mirror because if I go closer, everything changes. All the lighting changes, my whole perspective changes, the shape of my head's going to change. So I couldn't do that here, so I did the best I could with the eyes, but it was difficult because they're really hard to see from that distance in a mirror. But the rest of the colors were mostly monochrome. It was really tough to match color because unlike with the proportional divider where I could use the reflection to get my sizes, I couldn't use the reflection of the paint on a brush or on something like a color checker or a popsicle stick to see the color. So it was really hard to match color. I did mostly monochrome and then added some color variations later just to sort of make it a little more realistic and closer to what I saw when I was painting, when I was observing in the mirror. But I'm doing a lot more stopping and looking and checking than you can see in this video. I'm doing a lot of stopping and looking. I would normally sort of flick my eyes back and forth between my painting and my source. To sort of, it'll let me see things like contrast and big shapes and see how they vary between the two. But I couldn't do that here because flicking my eyes wouldn't actually let me see what I needed to see in the mirror. So a lot of the tools I might normally use to paint from life or even from a photo were not available to me in this way. So I just did a lot of like checking paint as I put it on the canvas. I did some wiping things off. You'll see me here making some corrections on the shadow side of my right eye. And I just did the best I could with doing the sort of long form observations and relying on memory. And this is the final painting. This is available on my Instagram. And I have a website, which is robertosuzuki.art. I have an Instagram, which is at Roberto_Suzuki_art. And I have a Facebook page, which is fb.com/RobertoSuzukiArt. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe. Thank you very much.